Okay, so it's now time for my session after hosting all the sessions this morning. Can everyone see the deck that I've shared?
Yes.
Yep, cool. Thank you. Excellent. So we're going to continue this theme of Power Platform governance. So here we've got a very good overview of Power BI. And as I mentioned before, when it kind of comes to governance for the Power Platform, Power BI is kind of quite separate to Power Apps and Power Automate. So what I'm talking about today is, in terms of Power Platform, I'm talking about Power Apps and Power Automate primarily, Dataverse, Power Virtualizations, those sorts of things, where typically Power BI sits off to the side, integrates with it all, but it has its own kind of governance frameworks and structures. Feel free to interact with the session today. It's going to be pretty informal. I've got some activities for you to do as well, so I do want some interaction, but feel free to take yourself off mute, ask questions if you like to. So what I'm covering today is, this is very much an introductory session on Power Platform governance, and I'm taking you through these 5 very simple tools, and you probably know these tools as well, but how to kind of quickly secure your Power Platform environments and how to gain some insights so you can understand what you kind of need to do with governance. So this is pretty much because for people who are, I guess, new to the Power Platform or new to having governance in place, it's also interesting when I look at other organizations and how many people have been using the Power Platform for a while but have no governance in place. So this is kind of for you as well. And I guess what the focus is with governance is trying to drive as much value as we can out of the Power Platform. Right, just to introduce myself for those who don't know me, my name is Hamish Shield. I am been consulting with Dynamics 365 customer engagement and the Power Platform for over 12 years now. I am a Microsoft MVP, and recently I started my own business called App Rising, where our mission is to inspire and enable anyone to create innovative solutions. And so this kind of pairs in really well with that Power Platform, where it's about enabling business users to create their own solutions to solve their business problems. So if you do want to get in contact, my contact details are on that slide there. So I thought it'd be worth kind of kicking off and starting off with what governance is and I guess why it is important. And so I've got this little diagram here, which essentially I'm trying to illustrate, as you use the Power Platform more and more, and you make more apps and you have more users involved, then you should see more value out of it. And there's the Forrester study that came out this year, studied a few businesses who do well with the Power Platform, have good governance in place, and they're seeing kind of on average 502% ROI over 3 years, which is absolutely massive. But just because you've got the Power Platform and you're using it a lot doesn't actually mean you're going to get that sort of return. And so like anything in the world, like your health, your car, you need to look after things to get the most out of it, right? And just like the Power Platform is the same thing. It's not like a magic system that looks after itself. You actually need to pay it some attention, give it some love, and put some governance in place. And so when we talk about, I guess, this difference here between with governance, without governance, what is it that drags us down? Sorry, I'll just get my pen going here. What drags us down from having governance without governance? So what I'm talking about here is, if you don't have governance, you've got kind of, I guess, a whole bunch of people, citizen developers or makers, whatever you want to call them. They don't know kind of standard IT practices, so they're going to make mistakes. They're going to build the wrong things, and you're going to end up with some technical debt. There's also the risk of having data loss, poor data integrity, which means that you can't run AI off poor data. You'll end up with non-compliance of things like licensing, your organization's IT policies. And all this kind of results in increased cost of maintenance for the IT team, and they'll end up spending more time troubleshooting and administering the platform than actually helping the business drive forward with the Power Platform. So that's where we've got this kind of, you'll see a reduction and the potential for you to get the most out of the Power Platform. So to go upwards, what we need to do is put some governance in place. And how I explain this is, I guess, kind of an analogy here, but putting your house in order. So let's pretend that the Power Platform is a house, and you've got a family, which is your business, your organization. And so we're going to say that the children in the family, there's your makers, and the blue people, this is your IT or your pro devs that look after the system. And so what I'm trying to say here is that business users or business people aren't necessarily children, but like children makers, don't have the IT experience. They don't know how to properly put together a database or create apps in the way that the IT people, pro dev people do. And so it's up to kind of IT to be, I guess, the parents of this family. And so what IT kind of needs to do in terms of putting governance in place is you've got this Power Platform, and it is based on your Microsoft Cloud. So we've got Azure Active Directory, for example. That's kind of the lock or the key to the door to get into the platform. But once you're in there, you've actually got to put some kind of governance in place so that your house is in order. And so the way I think about it is you need to have some sort of environment strategy. So environments are, I guess, containers that contain your Power Platform components. So in terms of this house, these are the rooms inside the house. And there, with those rooms, you can put locks on the doors, and you can make sure people can't get into certain rooms. But there is one room called the living room, also known as the default environment, which anyone can be in there, and you can't exclude people from that. So you need to have kind of a different way of approaching that default environment. So the Power Platform also has data loss prevention policies. So I think about these as things like locks on the windows or your child safety gates to keep your data contained. And we'll go through a bit more of what that means in a moment. Monitoring, so in the house we have baby monitors to check what the baby's doing or what the children are doing. And the same sort of thing applies to the Power Platform. You want to monitor the activity that's going on to make sure people are doing the right thing, but help educate them when they're not, and advise them on what are best practices, for example. So every household needs rules as well. So this is kind of where our policies come in, right? You have rules about how you use the Power Platform, and the same thing applies. We need to have rules for our children to make sure they're not going to break things or create things that they shouldn't be. And then as a family, we do need to train and nurture our children and to be the good kind of citizen developers they should be. And so there is a whole component there of nurturing and training as well. And so this kind of comes all into this kind of, I guess, an umbrella of governance or a center of excellence that helps drive the most out of the Power Platform. All right, so now we have a bit of an overview. What I want everyone to do is to take this survey. So I'm going to put into the chat a link, and this may take, where's the chat? Here we go. This might take a little bit. So it's not a very, very short survey. It's got a few questions there, but I'd like you to jump in and take this survey. And so what the survey is doing is I put it together based off there's a Microsoft Power Platform maturity model, and this is a way of assessing how mature is your organization's adoption of the Power Platform. And also part of the survey, I've got some questions around your organization's usage of the Power Platform as well. And so some of these questions you may not be able to answer. You may not know the answers, but that's okay. I just want you to take your best guess of those questions with regards to your organization. Do we have any questions on the survey? I'm going to open it up soon, and hopefully I should see people updating it in real time. That's the wrong one. can I get a thumbs up or a hands up or something if people are actually filling this in? So I'll give a few moments. I know it is a fairly lengthy survey. And so for those who want to find out more about this maturity survey that Microsoft the maturity matrix that Microsoft's put together, there's a couple of links there. And at the outcome of doing this survey is that you can help there's a whole bunch of kind of opportunities of things you can do to better your governance based on where you are in the maturity matrix. Right. Does anyone, Michael Biggs, are you filling in the survey? I'll pick on you. All right, here we go. Getting some results. I'll just give it another minute or so. Be good to get at least a couple more in there. Okay, one more refresh and then we'll continue. Okay, here we go. Cool. All right, so we'll kind of do a bit of a brief run through these questions and the answers that have been given. So the first one is around strategy and vision. So do you have a clear understanding across the organization about what you're using the Power Platform for, where you're heading? And so we can see here that I've numbered all the, for some reason, Customer Voice seems to put things in a random order. So I've got different numbers for these for the questions. So number one being pretty much you've got no level of strategy or vision, 5 being the highest, and that's the 1 to 5 is kind of the way these are all labeled. And so you can see we've got a whole bunch of people are kind of around. We've got obviously an organization has got a center of excellence, which is awesome, but most people are kind of between 1, 2s and 3s is the majority there around vision. The next one's around measuring your business value. So in terms of when you create an app, are you actually tracking the value that the app brings back, or before you start creating the app, do you actually measure what you think your outputs will be to help you decide whether you should create the app or not? So most people are kind of around a 2 for here. Same again for your kind of administration and governance approach. So kind of putting in kind of monitoring and security and all that sort of thing. Again, we're at a level of a 2. So I probably won't go through all of these, but I'm just kind of doing a quick skim through. A lot of people around are kind of just the level of 1 or 2. It's a very common number for those. But interesting, people have got a high level of kind of fusion teams of people from IT and the business working together, which is really good to see. So then in terms of, I guess, usage of the Power Platform, so we've kind of seen how mature organizations are, but then how, what's the amount of usage they're getting out of it. So you've got 3 organizations there with 20 plus people making apps and flows in the Power Platform. But we saw with the maturity, and most of those maturities are at like a number 2, which is a little bit scary, to be honest, a little bit concerning. And so those organizations who have lots of makers and have low maturity probably need to start looking at some governance, because it is going to devalue what you can get out of the Power Platform in the long term. So a range of environments in the organizations. Not many power, so yeah, not many, so lots of makers, not many Power Apps. And then in terms of Power Automate, okay, so you've got lots there. It's interesting. There's lots of makers, but there's also probably not, in terms of the grand scheme of things, not a lot of apps and flows being made by those makers, which is quite encouraging in terms of the usage. So what we'll do is I'm going to go back to the presentation. And what I've done is I've put together this kind of maturity matrix. And so what I'm trying to do is try to figure out, like, from these results, how do we kind of determine how we move forward and what we actually need to do. And so ideally with this maturity matrix, which compares maturity versus the usage of the Power Platform and the number of components you're making and the number of people using it and making things, you really want to be on this line here, where the end goal is that you're level 5 maturity and got everyone in the organization making apps and flows to automate stuff. And that's where you're going to get huge amounts of value out of it. And so what we've kind of seen is that a lot of, for most questions, a lot of people kind of hanging around that level of level 2 maturity. But in terms of the number of people using apps and flows, and we kind of saw that we had kind of 20 plus makers, which is kind of in the E area, and then we probably had quite a lot kind of around this. I think it was B and C as well, answers in terms of numbers of usage. So we're probably, let's just say, we're looking at a point on this kind of matrix at about here, for example, which tells me that we're not mature enough for where we should be in terms of the amount of usage that's going on. And so what this kind of tells me is that you possibly have got a lot of apps and flows being created in your environments that could be kind of turning into, honestly, into a bit of a mess, and there's some risk with that, and IT are going to have to clean that up. And so what governance is about is trying to restrict that kind of mess from happening and making sure that you kind of get yourself up to the line here where your maturity is kind of matches the level of usage. So I hope that makes sense. Have there any questions on any of this so far? I've got a question here from, is it Sumit? Is the survey freely available? Well, it's a survey I've put together myself. I actually am planning to make it freely available. And what I also plan to do is have some results automated out the back of it. So you fill in the survey and I can send you out some results. And the second question is there a way to restrict seeing apps created in the default environment in the mobile app? I can come to that, I think, later on in the session. So do talk about restricting in the default environment. Okay, so in terms of getting ourselves up to that kind of line of equal maturity with the usage of the Power Platform, we need to do a few things. I'm going to talk about these kind of 5 tools that we can use to just give ourselves a base level of governance until we kind of decide, what's our real plan? How are we going to put together a center of excellence, a team, define our strategy? I think it's really key that we kind of put this base level on first, get some quick wins on the board. At least you've got some sort of comfort that things aren't going to go too crazy with people making apps and flows in the Power Platform. So the first thing you need to do is find a Power Platform owner. And this is kind of super critical, and this needs to be the right type of person. So when I say the right type of person, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone with all the technical skills and all the technical know-how, but it needs to be someone who's super passionate about the Power Platform, believes in what the Power Platform is about, and someone who wants to both do the governance side of things, but also help with the nurture and the training, and I guess be an evangelist for the Power Platform in their organization. So this is kind of the first thing you need to do. Then once you've done that, you need to assign them the Power Platform admin role. So for those who have the Power Platform and don't have the Power Platform or admin role assigned to someone, what this really means is that it gives this person access to all the Power Platform environments, the Power Platform Admin Center, and they can actually do all the administration and governance activities. Without that, they're not going to be able to see everything that goes on within your Power Platform. So that's really important. It's important to note this is like an elevated admin role. So there's a whole bunch of list of things here that do describe what they get permissions to. So they do get a bit more insights into your Microsoft 365 Management Center, for example. So as well as someone being super passionate about the Power Platform, it needs to be someone who is reliable as well, because they've got elevated permissions. The next thing to do is to disable environment creation. It's amazing how many companies have just left the default settings for Power Platform environments, and so by default, anyone in your organization can go in and create a production environment. And so what you typically want to do is go into your Power Platform settings under the admin center, and you want to set it so that only specific admins can create environments. And so that'll be people who have the Power Platform admin role. There is another option to disable people from creating trial environments. Personally, I think we should let people create trial environments that only last for 30 days, and it kind of helps people experiment and learn in a safe way. If you've kind of got some you've got some data loss prevention policies in place, it'll help them, I guess, create their own little playpen where they can experiment and learn as well. So applying security groups to environments. So for your production and your sandbox type environments, you may want to apply security groups, and that just gives you the kind of extra layer of protection, saying, for this, say, your Dynamics 365 dev environment, you only really want the kind of development people to be in there and seeing the apps and working in that environment. So as soon as you put a security group on an environment, it disables all the users, especially if you've got a database, it disables all the users in there. And when they kind of go to their homepage for, let's say, Dynamics apps, for example, they will only see the environments that they're in, for the security groups they're in, sorry. If you don't apply security group, then everyone can see those environments. They may not have to do anything because of security roles, but it's another good layer to put onto those environments. Any questions so far on any of these kind of first three steps?
One question, Hamish.
Yes.
For the environment creations, when you say that for admins can create the environments, so the trial can be created by anyone?
Yes. So if I go back to that previous screen, I've got it set up here that a trial can be created by anyone, and that's the default setting. You can go in there and click only specific admins as well, and that will mean no one can create trials in your environment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That means the nurturing part is done. Then people can create and they can develop something, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then you've also got the default environment. So every and I'm not sure I'll explain it. I'll explain the default environment, but every organization has a default environment, and it's basically meant to be treated like a playpen for people to experiment in. There's no way that you can exclude people from that environment. And so that's kind of the main area where people go. And by default, when you open up, say, make.powerapps.com to make a Power App, you typically end up in that environment. It's kind of the environment you've got to monitor a bit, because you'll see probably a whole lot of junk ending up in there as people test things and play around with things.
Yeah.
But I guess the trial environment's another type of playpen. If people want something specific for them, or want to, trial out Dataverse or that sort of thing.
Yeah, and at least we know that next 30 days it will be gone, or yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and it's not going to be there forever and accumulating technical debt inside this environment, right? Yeah.
Which I have seen so far. So yeah, thank you.
Yep. You probably will. So it's not, and so don't be afraid that if you've got an organization with heaps of apps and heaps of flows and heaps of users, it's not like it's a train wreck. It's pretty common, to be honest, but it's just is a lot more work to get it under control. So you're better to kind of start on this sort of stuff early. So I got screwed. So data loss prevention policies. So for me, I reckon these are probably one of the most important things to get in place straight away. So what I'll do is I'll first of all explain what these are, because I'm not sure if most people know, but what they are a way of, I guess, putting a boundary or ring fence around an environment. So if we're talking about our house analogy again, it's basically kind of putting locks on the doors and the windows to stop things from getting out. But they kind of so the way that it works is you have you set up a data loss prevention policy, and as we all know, the Power Platform has over 500 connectors that you can connect to different services and different points of data. So in a policy, you basically say, you put the connectors into these 3 different buckets. So the first one is the business bucket, and that's basically saying these sorts of connectors hold our business data, which we want to keep secure and safe within our organization. You then have the non-business bucket, which is basically any connectors to things that you would like to allow people to create apps or Power Automate for, but you don't want it mixing with your business data. And then you've got a third bucket, which is blocked, which just means you don't want anyone in your organization to be creating apps or flows that connect to those data sources. And so, for example, out of the box, there are no data loss prevention policies applied. So out of the box, someone can, if they have access to Dynamics 365, they could actually tweet out, create a Power App that takes data from your contact records in Dynamics 365 and post them out to Twitter, which is a massive security risk, and I guess someone would have to be very malicious to want to go and do that, but that capability is there. And I think you probably just don't really want to take on that risk. You want to kind of shut that down. Other kind of examples where people just they just make mistakes in general, right? So you may have someone who, for whatever reason, created a flow which copies documents from SharePoint and puts it into Google Drive, where Google Drive's not part of your organization's ecosystem, and you probably have policies against putting important documents there, but someone could actually copy documents across, and all of a sudden you've got data from inside your organization outside, which is a security risk. And then also another scenario is where people people who are used to, probably more for the pro developer side, people who are used to using SQL databases as their data source, and your company may have a policy where actually they want to go everything to the cloud using Dataverse databases. Data loss prevention policies can help you kind of govern that by saying, hey, we're not allowing anyone to create apps over SQL unless it's in a certain circumstance and you've got a special environment for it. So in this kind of diagram here, the way that we can explain the policies, that we've got these 3 environments, A, B, and C, and they have this policy on the right applied to them. And so what it means is that someone could create a Power App that includes Dataverse and SharePoint, but they can't create a Power App that has SharePoint and Google Drive, for example. So they can't share information between them. And then for the third one, in terms of being blocked, no one can use Power Automate or Power Apps to connect to Twitter at all. So that's that kind of scenario, this one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a bit of a demo of how easy this is to set up. So I'm going to go to, I've got a trial environment here. And so in your Power Platform Admin Center, you've got policies down the bottom, and you'll see the new pay-as-you-go billing policies there, or set up. So I don't know if you saw that at Ignite recently, but there's a new way to pay for your Power Apps. But under here, there's data policies. So these are your data loss prevention policies. And so by default, in every environment, there's nothing set up. So people can literally just tweet out all of your information if they wanted to, which is a bit of a scary thought, especially for kind of IT administrators and security people. So first of all, you give it the policy a name. So I'm just going to call this policy I'm going to create for my default environment. And then what you do, you've got the second step is to assign connectors. So you've got a list of all the connectors that are available for the Power Platform. And then as you see, you've got the 3 buckets here. So what I'm going to do is, and by default, everything's just in the non-business bucket. But I'm just going to say, let's select a few of my Microsoft ones, and I'm just going to do this as an example, but you move that to the business bucket. So basically, assign your connectors to these different buckets based on a policy that you've designed. And you may say you want to block a whole bunch as well. So I'm just going to say, let's block the Twitter one. And I want to block that. And so once you've kind of got that all set up, you've got your policy, you've got your kind of your connectors in different buckets. We have also got the ability, which is this is new, it's kind of in preview, but people can create custom connectors as well. So that's about if there's an API or a service you want to connect to with Power Apps or Power Automate, but there is no connector available, you can create your own connector for that. And so the way they handle that is through these what they call patterns. And so at the moment, a star means kind of anything goes, but you can put patterns in for the URL of the API that you're calling, and then you can say whether or not which kind of data group it's in. So if I edit this, I can say you either ignore it or you can put them into the different buckets. And so say if you had an, I don't know, API which was calling a web service, you'd put, and you wanted to allow it, you could maybe put it into the business bucket, and then you'd update the pattern to be the URL of that API. So and you can put as many kind of rules in here as well. It goes in a certain order that they get applied. So you've got quite a lot of flexibility with what you can do here. But probably, for most organizations, custom connectors, especially you're new to Power Platform, there probably aren't a lot of custom connectors around. So you typically just kind of skip that step when you're starting out. Then you get to define the scope of this policy. So there's kind of 3 options. One, that you can edit to all environments, and that includes any brand new environments that are created. You can choose to add it to a select group of environments, or you can choose to exclude certain environments. And so the exclude in certain environments is really good if you've got a kind of a default policy that you want to apply across the organization and for new environments coming on board as well. So typically what you want to do is as part of your DLP strategy is set up a base a data loss prevention policy, have it apply to all environments using this exclude one, apart from you may have, say, like your Dynamics 365 prod environment, for example, may have some other connectors that you wouldn't want citizen developers to use. But the good thing about this exclude certain environments one is that every time a new environment is created, so this is kind of environments created through Microsoft Teams, for example, or someone creates a new trial, they will automatically get added to the policy that is marked as exclude certain environments. They get added to it. So quite a key one to understand there. So don't worry if you're not, if this is, there's probably a lot of information in terms of data loss prevention policies. Yeah, I'm writing a couple of blogs about this at the moment, so I can share a link with you about how to kind of approach this for your organization. And so in terms of, we've chosen the scope to exclude certain environments. So at the moment, I've got all my environments listed here. And I'm going to say, actually, I'm just going to exclude from this one. I want my Dynamics 365 and my COE environments to be excluded, but I want the default environment to have this policy. And I also want the developer environment that's been created to have that as well. So I'm going to add those to the policy to exclude them. And so then once you've done, you can do a bit of review, and then you create the policy and it gets applied. So what happens at this stage, now you've created this policy, if you have any apps or flows that violate this policy existing in your system, then they will stop working. And so that's why it's really quite important to try and get on top of this sort of thing early before you get too many apps or flows in your environment. So I've just done some work with a customer who literally had hundreds of apps and hundreds of flows, and we had applied DLP policies. And there was a huge amount of analysis up front to just discover what connectors have been used, which ones we can block, and which environments. And it was quite a massive bit of work. So do get onto this sort of stuff early as possible. So just going back to my presentation here, I do have a link here to a blog I've written around how to, I guess, put in place a DLP strategy so that you set up your initial data loss prevention to start off with, and then as more environments and your Power Platform grows and more makers come on board, how do you handle adjusting those policies or adding in new ones? So there's a bit of a write-up on strategy there if you're interested. Any questions on DLPs there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned, Hamish, around if you already have many apps running and we don't have a policy set up, so how do you analyze it, whether there is a leak happening already? Because the fear is if we stop it, we put a policy, then it means it stopped working.
Yes, yeah, and that really annoys users if you stop their apps and go, and it really pisses them off. So it is really quite complex. The way that I did it was install the Center of Excellence Toolkit from Microsoft, and that and there's a session about that after this actually with JJ. You should probably take a look at. But basically, it collates all of the information from across all of your environments and brings it into one database. And then from there, I actually exported all that to Excel, and I just analyzed that and pivot tables and all sorts to kind of split out environments into different groups. And I basically had one group which was, they had a kind of they were using heaps of connectors. So I had a more lenient DLP policy for them versus, I guess, a very restrictive default policy for most of the environments that had like citizen developers in them. That makes sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So got your point here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's a bit of, I mean, reach out to me if you do need some help, because there's a bit of work behind all of that. Yeah.
Thanks, Hamish.
No worries. Right. So in those that survey, I asked you, a bunch of questions at the end around your Power Platform usage in terms of how many environments do you have, how many makers do you have, how many apps and flows do you have in the default environment? And so you may not know that off the top of your head, especially if you're not kind of monitoring your Power Platform on a regular basis. And so what I'm going to show you now is how to use the Power Platform Admin Center to just kind of get an understanding of all of this. We're not going to get like definite numbers, but for what we kind of want to achieve in terms of that maturity matrix versus usage, you just kind of want to have an idea of what's going on, and then that will kind of inform you on how much governance you need to start putting in place now. Because your governance journey it's a long way. There's a lot of things you can do in terms of governance. You don't want to, I guess, over invest if people aren't using the platform. So it's about kind of keeping that balance there. So first of all, finding environments is actually, how many environments you've got is actually relatively easily. You just go into the Power Platform Admin Center, and I can see in my example here, I've got 4 environments. Finding how many makers you've got is actually not that easy out of the box. One way you can do it is through the Power Platform Admin Center. You can go into the analytics side and go into Power Apps. And there is an option under preview. I think you need to turn it on in the settings, but to have tenant-wide analytics. So basically what that is doing is showing you information about all of the apps across your entire tenant through all of the environments. Out of the box, or before they kind of put this feature in, you can only see one environment at a time, which is really quite hard to see what's going on across the whole tenant. And so here in this example here, we can see this organization's got over 1,000 active makers of Power Apps. So it kind of gives us a good idea of the scale, right? This is a big organization with a lot of makers. It doesn't tell you how many people are making Power Virtual Agent bots or who's making Power Automate flows, but it is a pretty good indication of the scale of what we've got going on in the organization. So in terms of looking at how many apps and flows you've got, a really good indication is just looking at the default environment, because the Power Platform Admin Center doesn't really have the ability to kind of go completely tenant-wide, especially when it comes to flows. And so, but if we look at the default environment, that gives us a probably good indication of, especially the level of citizen developers, so the people, the business people who are making apps. It gives us a good idea of what's going on there. Because the default environment is literally when they go into make.powerapps.com, that is the environment that most of your makers will land in automatically, and they won't know anything about other environments and how to switch environments. So they'll just start creating things there. And working with this large organization I've been working with recently, they had maybe tens or whatever, hundreds of apps in other environments. In the default environment, they had like thousands of apps. So that's a good place to give an indication again of the scale of the stuff that you need to manage and govern. And so the way you do that, I'm just going to give another quick demo, is by coming into your environments, and as an admin, you can come in and click into the default environment. So whatever your environment is called, or your tenant is called, your environment will be called the tenant name plus default. And so that is the default environment. It also has a type of default as well. And so this is one you really need to keep an eye on, because you cannot restrict who can make things in here. And so what I want to do here is I want to look at how many apps we've got in this environment to see, how crazy it's got. And so here we've got a list of apps, and you can go through and manually count them. It's a bit rudimentary, but it gives you an idea again of the scale of things. And same again if we go back to our environment. And I go to flows. Again, we get a list of flows that are in that environment. And as an administrator, you've got a few more rights here to do things like enable or disable flows, share them, all that sort of thing as well. Very much the basics though. Okay. Right, so that kind of gives you, the idea of the scale of how people are using it, and maybe the scale of not necessarily the problem, but the scale of risk you may be taking on by not having any governance in place. And probably the scale of work you have to do to do a bit of tidy up. So if you do get to a point where you literally have thousands of apps and flows, it even gets to a point where the tools you can use, especially in the Centre of Excellence Toolkit, they start kind of grinding to a halt, because there's just so much data for them to tune through, and it makes things really difficult. So I do, I guess I can't emphasize enough getting onto governance as soon as possible. The other good thing to look at in terms of the Power Platform Admin Center is the analytics. So this kind of gives you an idea of the health of your system in terms of what's going on. And what I typically do is monitor this on a fairly kind of regular basis, and just look for things like, in the Database tab, for example, look at what are the failing workflows, what are the failing plugins, looking for abnormal use of high use of entities. And so some examples I've seen before is where you've got maybe a web service or an integration just absolutely hammering a certain entity and reading it like hundreds of thousands of times a day. And so that kind of leads to high kind of API usage, and we know there's limits on the Power Platform. So this is a really good area to look at in the Database tab of just kind of what's going on behind the scenes as well. In the Power Automate tab, it's probably my favorite port, to be honest, is you've got this kind of timeline of different flows running over time, and you can see here, this is an example of a client of mine where on the go live week, you can see quite a big black part of the bar there, which is where a whole bunch of flows failed, and then ever kind of since then everything's been pretty smooth sailing. So it's kind of good to come in here and get a very good glimpse of, over the last few weeks, our Power Automate flows have been running pretty smoothly. So you want to monitor that. Also look at the things like there's an errors tab here, and that's really good for spotting. It gives you a report of what the flow is called and the number of errors it has. So you can go see what's failing. And also, I also check out the connectors tab as well. So are there kind of any abnormal connectors that people are using? Like, for example, are they using the YouTube or the Twitter connector? What are they using it for in terms of for business purposes? So take a look at that. And then similar again for the Power Apps page. Regularly check on that and have a look at the errors. Have a look at where apps have got performance issues as well. Again, just gives you a really good overview of what's going on, what your users are experiencing. And again, I often check out kind of abnormal connector use as well, just because you just don't want to have data being shared with services that shouldn't be. This is probably a classic favorite that people always get stuck with, is the capacity, especially in the database capacity. Often people will completely ignore this page and don't monitor it, and you end up with environments that are over database capacity, which means that you cannot create any new environments, you can't do certain environment operations, and it kind of really restricts what you can do in terms of the Power Platform. So this is a really good page to monitor and make sure you're not using more database capacity than you should be. And things that kind of take up a lot of the space are usually like attachments to emails and that sort of thing inside of your Dataverse environment. So there are ways of restricting that, but there are also ways of you can buy more capacity as well, so you can keep going with the Power Platform. But a page where it's funny how common you go into someone's environment and the page is red with overcapacity in terms of database usage.
And
so what? Oh, sorry, Ganesh.
Ask one question around that same.
Yeah,
because it's a Power in Power Platform, because we can't tag something like I don't know, like in Azure resources, we can tag, okay, this business unit is consuming this data, this much database capacity, and everyone has their own, every business unit want to have their own. How do you manage it? Because that's a quite a challenging task, because overall on the platform it looks like it shows around the total capacity, and each business unit buys, I don't know, 40 GB or 80 GB depending on the usage. How do you manage it? It's so hard.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard. So the reason I'm smiling is because I know the answer to this one, and I've been with other organizations who have the same problem, right? It's a real problem, especially where you want to split up like you do with your Azure resources, right? You want to split up per business unit. I think I haven't looked into much into the pay-as-you-go model, but that is essential. I don't know if you've seen that, but basically they're allowing you to assign an environment to an Azure resource, I think, and so you pay through your Azure subscription for that environment and what's being used in that environment. So that's something different. I mean, that's only announced last week, so it's worth looking at that. If you're keeping in with the current model, if you I highly recommend you install the Power Platform COE Starter Kit. In there, it has a it's quite manual still, but it has a way of letting you, brings in all your environments into this Power App. And part of the things that you can do with this Power App is you can fill in for an environment the agreed amount of data usage that environment will take up, and it'll also tell you how much it's actually taking up. So you can kind of use that to monitor what that business unit agreed in terms of storage, and when they go over, then they have to buy more, and then you kind of manually update the app to say they've bought more, but you can use that to kind of monitor and allocate out in a manual way. But it's well worth looking at the starter kit, and maybe I know JJ's got a session on that after this. He may cover it then, or ask him about the environment capacity allocation. In the next session, he should be able to show you that.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, governance, it's super tricky. It is really hard. And so what I've shown you today is just like, I guess, a very basic, very base level. And if you want to go further and get more insights and have more control and have more automation, and kind of going from that maturity level 3 and up, you need to start putting in this Centre of Excellence starter kit. That's kind of that will it's really good, and it will kind of save you a lot of pain and effort as well.
Thanks. Thank you, Hamish.
All right, so just to wrap up with we're actually running out a bit over time, but what we went through today was, I guess, very kind of basic governance and administration setup, and it's all about kind of getting yourself ready, assigning that Power Platform admin role, putting some kind of more security measures in place that out of the box it's a little bit loose, but just remember that you have the house analogy, right? Azure AD is actually locking the house and making sure people from the outside can't get in, so you're relatively okay there. But it's just the bits that scare me are users on the inside be able to send data out, and so those data loss prevention policies, I highly encourage people to get those in as soon as possible, because people do just make genuine mistakes, and it's just it's an easy kind of gap to plug. And then in terms of getting some insights about what's actually going on in your Power Platform, if you don't regularly monitor it, just go look at the Power Platform Admin Center. I mean, it probably is missing quite a lot of functionality, and they are working on improving that and giving you more kind of tenant-wide analytics. But the next step from that would be to go install that Centre of Excellence Toolkit, which the next session is on. So check that out. But what I would do is I would go look at your results from that that survey where we got you to around the maturity. Go look at the link here around the maturity model opportunities. So it basically says, when you're at this level, what are your opportunities to scale up and go up the next level? And it kind of gives you a bit of guidance on what to do, and it's all linked in to the Centre of Excellence Toolkit as well. So Microsoft provide a lot of guidance around all of that. And that's everything. Were there any other questions on all of this? I think we had one around from Samit around, is there a way to restrict seeing apps created in the default environment in the mobile app? It's a tricky one. So it depends. So when you share an app with someone, so someone can create an app in the default environment. People shouldn't be able to see that until it's shared with them, but then it will come up in their mobile app. But with apps, and especially Canvas apps, there are ways of you mark apps as like hero apps or feature apps, and they kind of go to the top of the list. So that's a good way of trying to, I guess, raise your important apps to the top. But if an app's shared with someone, I don't think there's any real way of completely restricting them from seeing it, apart from removing their access or removing the sharing from that user. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. I don't know if anyone else has a better answer to that one than I do, but feel free to jump in if you want.
Yeah, thanks, Hamish. I think for us, one of the problem we had was doing a pre-sales, and one of the questions that the customer was asking is they have, as depicted earlier, they didn't set up the house properly, and they let people go on fire with the citizen dev, and now they are trying to roll out the app to all the employees. And what happened? And I think this is something that Microsoft has changed, because I remember like 6 months back when I had done the mobile app, I can basically see what has been shared with me. But today, when you do that, as soon as you log in, you basically see all the crap. And I think your suggestion to put Hero app might be better, but I'm not sure will it automatically move up the stack automatically, or
Yeah, I think your hero apps they're called hero apps because they go to the top and they're kind of like pinned at the top of the list. The other thing that they just announced at Ignite last week is this like a new way of deploying apps where you can basically kind of deploy them through like the Apple, your internal Apple store. And I'm not very much up to play with this, but you deploy an app and that can have multiple apps inside it. So you don't have that kind of overall one Power App with all thousands of apps in it. You just have one which has just the apps you need. That's in, I think, the preview at the moment. So worth checking that out as well.